Let's check if we are on. Just gonna see if we got reception.
Question is, do I actually smoke like after this podcast and just like
chill for the rest of the night?
A McFlurry never tastes as good as when you have it at midnight out of your mind. You just like walk into McDonald's and they know, because you're just like, you can barely talk. You go in there, you think like, I'll just have a McFlurry, and then you just order an entire meal and like 2 apple pies and 2 coffees. You're just like, oh, what's happened to my life?
That one looks right and says that we are live. Then it's a question of when it gets on this thing.
Alright, sending tweets.
Yep.
Alright, we are live.
Take it away.
Alright. Hey, how you doing, guys? Welcome to the Blue Horseshoe Club, episode 6. We are joined here today. Again, I'm Rodin. Joined here by our usual suspects here. We got Caleb, our lead of the SEC Lounge, and Yintan, current CSM member, and very popular FC and personality in general in Providence.
General media whore, he can say.
There you go.
He's the last white hope of Providence.
Oh wow. My goodness, the last.
What's the term? Nuksukau, great white warrior or something.
No, it was the great white hope, but he came out of retirement to like try and beat this white boxer. I don't remember who it was, so that doesn't work. I didn't come out of retirement. I've been there the whole damn time, boy.
Oh, that's
I'm
right.
I'm the establishment. I'm the Triple H of this gig.
Oh, you can retire when you've been in the game for what, 10 years?
I'm getting fucking close to that.
I know you are.
I'm close.
Are you?
Yeah. I started when I was 12.
Oh shit.
Yep. So it's what, next year, right? You get your sword.
Yeah. Fucking Christ, that's a long time.
All right.
Impressive. Tonight's show is actually going to be in honor of some of the topics that we've been hearing a lot from the last 2 months at least, and it's actually named after Dirk McGurk's article and his little spin on the whole issue of the nerfs coming up and the ones that we hope would be coming up. The topic is Make Depletion Great Again, and to anyone out there that are interested, I can highly suggest that they go and read the actual articles. This one is really good. It touches upon the whole history of the different ships involved and all of this, and it was spun in quite a few of the shows. But what we are going to do today is we're going to try and dig a little bit deeper and look at some of the details that are not necessarily about the historical context or the specific grand vision, but more about concrete examples and concrete parallels in other games. So without further ado, I'm going to start us out with one of the first things on my list, which is things that brought me to the game, which is when I opened the game way back in 2002. Yes, in beta. What struck me was that this auction house did not look like any other auction house I had ever tried. And that was because this was not an auction house at all. This was based on a proper real-life brokerage system. So you had an actual exchange of both sell orders and buy orders. This was so unique to me that I already could see this was a game where all the market things that I was interested in was definitely going to happen, because no other game had anything remotely like it. So start this topic off, because I'm sure that everyone in chat, and at least and also our members on the panel, have played a lot of games. What's your comment on the whole difference between working in markets in an auction house and in something like Eve? Roden?
Yeah. Before we get really deep into it, Caleb, can you link Discord for?
Of course.
Yeah. So I tried to, but it stopped me. All right. But for me, the biggest, when I came into Eve, at the time, it would have been only the third MMO I've ever tried. So I'm actually coming into the whole market scenario with expecting that all other MMOs markets work like Eve, not the other way around. So I was actually very disappointed when that wasn't the case. And the biggest thing, like right now, after having tried out several MMOs since then, no other MMO market just comes close, to having an active brokerage system, vice an auction house system, where you just place an order and you have to let it go, right? Or even predominantly NPC-driven markets, like a lot of free-to-play MMOs that don't even exist anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I personally came into this game and I just started Ninja Salvaging.
But you must have played other MMOs in the meantime. But you must have cheated on Eve a few times.
Oh, yeah, I've played other MMOs, but I've literally never gotten to the point in another MMO where I had to interact with the market.
So you never actually tried using markets, auction house, or anything in other MMOs at all?
No, I mean, like, I've bought stuff from vendors in World of Warcraft when I tried it when I was like 13, 14. And I didn't really get to the point where I needed to use the market in Final Fantasy, whichever the Final Fantasy one was, where you could actually play a cat girl. Because that was literally the only reason why I played the game. Because my friends were playing it, and they were like,
"Stop putting anime stuff in my show."
I was like, "No, I won't play that game." And then they told me, "Jin, you can play a cat girl," and I was like, "I will try it."
I will happily dedicate an entire show to anime and the anime wars that was not wars, but we should maybe try to stick to the topics for today. One of the things that I find interesting about Jintan's argument here is that he never had a need, right? And this takes us into some of the whole things that we've been discussing lately, is that what is the unique selling points of Eve? And I know that I keep bashing on as if I know what the unique selling point is from CCP's side, but this is not really about knowing. This is about my personal perspective on what keeps me in Eve and not leaving for another game, right? And one of these are especially focused on the market and the fact that there is an actual economic simulation going on in Eve. You need to use the market in Eve. There is no way around it. Everyone uses it in one way or another. They cannot really do what Jin just pointed out, never interact with the market. Everyone always interacts with the market in Eve. There's a few exceptions to this, but that takes us into the whole, if I mine it, it's free, and then it's going to trigger every market guy out there, and we should maybe stay away from that. The point is that Eve has been designed so it is better for you to always use the market and always outsource some of the strain to the things that you're doing.
And that's due to a couple of things. And the first off, and the reason why that's become so central to the Eve kind of philosophy, is back obviously at the start of the game. Well, not even the start of the game, I suppose like 2004, 2005 era, when you started being able to build absolutely everything, or at least the majority of things. It was still specialized. There were still huge SP limits. The people who are trained to become very good producers, maybe they didn't have the mining skills. Maybe they couldn't get the meta items they needed to fit out their ships. Like, it was always better to collaborate with other people because they were more efficient at doing tasks than you, which is a fundamental part of the real life economy. And I think that's a very interesting part. It's an exchange of services.
And when I use the term PvP, that's exactly what I'm trying to infer or point out to people, that there is more to PvP than just shooting each other in the face. there is PvP in everything in EVE, and PvP is not always just about aggressing towards the other player. Player versus player is also with other players, right? It's that nothing in EVE is going to avoid taking part in other players' activities, whether you are producing stuff, when you're sourcing materials because you're not mining it yourself. So it's always about collaboration, whether you know it or not.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that really separates EVE from the rest of the games, even to date, is the fact that best in slot is more often than not, you know, or I guess not so much with officers, right? But barring that, it's a craft-based, you know, gear system as opposed to go to dungeon, get loot.
Yeah, and I think
Hope
that's
your loot is the best loot.
I think that's also important, that if you compare to any other game, player created items in all other games were basically just a stepping stone to the loot that you were chasing. Where in EVE, at least to a large extent, player-owned stuff was at the foundation and the core of every normal activity. You could get these loot things to add to your setup, but fundamentally you would be depending on either building it yourself, which is of course going to be costly, or you had to actually outsource that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that comes back down to kind of a design perspective on EVE itself, because whereas in other MMOs, the primary draw, for example, from World of Warcraft or, you know, Final Fantasy or Guild Wars 2 is the PvE. That is the primary thing that's marketed, and it's the primary thing that draws people into the game. Whilst it does have a PvP community, that isn't the vast majority of players. The vast majority of players are PvE players. Where in EVE, the end game content is almost exclusively PvP. It's about interacting and dominating either through direct or indirect means other players.
Which is also why I think it's so funny that there's been this reaction from the player base when something that I think most people will agree is considered end-level content, ships like the Raw Core, ships like the super carriers, even carriers, and of course ships like the Titans. These things were not meant to go into space and have anything to do with the PvE environment. They were only meant for staging against other players in this emergent PvP game, right?
Yeah, the question the question you have there is like, sorry, go ahead, Rohan.
And at least until they got numerous enough where you could now use them not in PvP.
Yeah, the question is that emergent gameplay that CCP should be endorsing, or is that damaging to the game? And that's a question that only CCP at the end of the day can truly decide upon, but it's for the community as itself to argue about, which is what we've seen a lot of.
Yeah, it's just
very passionate debate.
Oh, very. It's funny that we've reached a point where the players think that it's normal. This is almost economic hypernormalization. It's like, because there's enough people that are using these things for this purpose, now suddenly that is their purpose. And then it's almost as if we've been asking CCP to tweak towards that purpose. And that's totally counter to the game design, at least in my opinion, which is why then when the design starts breaking down on the other side and people respond with rage, it's like, well, but you asked for these things. Why are you surprised that the stuff that was in the past have been broken when you have actually asked for the feature that broke it?
Well, that's kind of it's a very human thing, right? Like we want things that may not be good for us.
Yeah, and this brings on the whole problem, right? EVE is supposed to be competitive. It's supposed to be something that simulates warfare and strife and all these competitive player versus player behaviors, right? I am totally for abundance and easy living, right, in real life. But if you bring that into EVE, there is no reason. It's like breaking, I keep using the same argument again and again. Sports are fundamentally simulated warfare, right? And it's designed to be extremely competitive. There is only one ball in football, even whether it's European or American football, there's only one ball. If you suddenly gave everyone a ball, then it's not a simulated warfare anymore. It loses the purpose. So the
game is defined by your struggle against it.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what gives you that catharsis, the feeling of having struggled and fought and put in some effort to get something in the other on the other side. And I go as far as to say I would rather lose in Eve and have Eve function than this mediocre feeling of worthlessness.
You'd rather get last place and no medal than a participation trophy.
Exactly.
You're part of the anti-participation trophy movement. I'm okay with that.
It's like, if everyone gets a fucking gold medal, this whole thing of it's just about being there, what kind of bullshit is that? Anyone that's ever watched the Olympics know that it's not just about being there. It's only about one thing. It's about winning, coming close to winning or not. And those that lose are now motivated to go back home and train for the next 4 years and hope that they've not grown too old to actually participate the next Olympics, right? This is kind of my point. I keep saying that they've made it into easy mode Eve, and we started discussing this before the show, and I can't. It's not that it's become so easy that it is World of Warcraft, or that it is another first-person shooter where you just press space and then respawn, and then you get another try, and then someone counts the frags in the end, and it's all good fights or griefing and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's that easy, but I'm saying that compared to the game that we used to have when Eve was in growth and got new players all the time, we've flattened out, we've started tanking and losing players, and everything that created content in the past is gone.
I think it's more of a, as the years went by, in the beginning it was very chaotic, right? It was wars, conflict, I want space, I want money. But I think we've evolved into more of a community building game as opposed to a standard PvP game. Yeah, at least that's what it feels like in a lot of the circles.
Greek city-states, not like feudal era Japan.
We need more samurais.
That's the differentiation I like to make. Like early era Japan, when there was a ton of rice kingdoms, there was a lot of fucking warring back then because land was incredibly valuable and people needed it. Whereas in the Greek city-states, land wasn't as valuable and kind of warfare was almost ritualized, and it was something done. It was very honorable and was a way to prove yourself as a man.
There's a huge irony.
Then the Persians came, and then bad things happened. But let's not talk about that because that's actual history.
There's a huge irony about the British person doing that whole exoticism in this case, talking about these things, how it happened in other exotic nations.
Oh yeah, because
there was nothing but tribal warfare in the UK. That was like one big tribal clusterfuck. So much so that everyone outside came and steamrolled them in different centuries.
And then we just got really mad, so we steamrolled a third of the world.
Pretty much. A lot of grudge, and then you conquered most of the known world. Well, you did it with a very, very specific strategy that I would like to see in Eve, which is the financial one. Because it was not militaristic.
There's no Eve equivalent to opium, though. How are you going to fuck up the line members without Eve opium?
We have drugs in Eve.
Yeah, but it's not the same thing. Like,
I'm sure that there's some zombie farmers that really need their drugs and shit.
So are you saying that Plex is that no? That's CCP's opium.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is CCP is British Empiring all of the.
The irony is that, well, in this case, the boosters would be the opium, the Plex would be the gold or silver that the British Empire ran out of, so they couldn't actually buy the tea and silks that they needed. So instead, they traded boosters with zombie farming Chinese or something like that. I don't know exactly where you're going to get the ironclads in.
This is getting very messy.
But
this is a very messy political analogy.
But the point.
Can we just invade China and get over with it?
So you're saying that we should move Tranquility to Serenity?
Yeah, that's the only.
Merge them, yes, and then move them all to China so they're under Chinese law.
Ironically, I think that would be a genuine solution, like the current stagnation, and that's primarily because Western and Eastern cultures are so diplomatically like incompatible that if you put the Chinese server, it's the same reason why the Russians are really fucking hard to understand. It's just because they don't see the world in the same way we do, because they have a fundamentally different outlook. Whereas the Americanized, Westernized kind of view on the world has become homogenous, especially within EVE, just due to the amount of cultural cross-pollination. I reckon if we saw the Chinese come in, they would bring an entirely different way to play and look at the game, and also how to handle diplomacy, because we've seen that Aegis of hasn't affected the Chinese games like large society meta, as it were. Like, they've still got an N3-esque entity ruling the vast majority of their game. And while some of that does come down to bots, I think some of it does come down to their social dynamics and their cultural decisions as well.
So basically you're saying that if we got the Chinese, we would get some strange bastard child of like what would happen if you bred Delve with the drone lands?
Well, I think it would just genuinely be. It would be interesting to see, because we don't know how, for example, Goonswarm. How would Goonswarm interact to the suddenly a 10,000-man Chinese block turning up on the server? What would that do to their diplomatic outlook in the game? How would PL be treated by this new block? Because PL traditionally hasn't held space and hasn't been a they generally don't tie themselves down to anything that can be destroyed. How would the Chinese see that? You've got to understand that there's a lot of kind of cultural norms that we take for advantage, like content, for example. Content being the primary driver of EVE Online. Maybe that's not a big of a factor for the Chinese.
Yeah, it's a very funny thing, because you have the basis for a very good thesis about synoptics of Western versus Eastern gaming culture, because one of the things that most people that's actually tried any of the Eastern games will be aware of is that there's a lot more tolerance for grind in the East, to a level that makes Westerners just burn out. And the funny fact is that EVE has the most grind of any Western MMO.
It was Rooks and Kings who went to Serenity for a while, primarily.
That's right.
But I believe a bunch of elite PvPers from Tranquility also went across. I know Reload and a lot of people from Lumpy recently attempted to make a movement over there, and they had a bit of fun, but it was very difficult apparently. Mainly because they just couldn't plex up. They just couldn't stay as Omega accounts.
I think this is a good point to then transition into one of the other points that I put in the show notes, because the unique things about EVE that when we talk about markets and when we're talking about player behavior and player culture, another thing that's extremely different in EVE that most people don't necessarily think about every day is something as simple as the limitation of inventory. We are so used to playing MMOs, and there's always some sort of attempt to put sinks and crafting time sinks and stuff like that on things like bag slots, and you have to even sometimes micropayment buy new storage space for your bank and things like that. Whereas when I came into EVE, again, this is all the way back in the beginning, it already had this totally different approach that you had infinite storage. What's your thoughts on that? Because to me that is so novel and so out of the box and so different than any other game that it just blew me away. Because things like, say something like Entity's huge collection of one of every item in the game, that of course started back then, was because this was possible. This is not possible in any other game out there that I know of.
It's very novel, right? It's such a nuanced barrier, you know, space, right? Physical space, physical storage, limitations on what a character can do to interact with the market. They're great barriers, but at the same time, I think it lends itself very naturally to some really expansive alt play, as we see with ghost farmers and like large scale PI alts, things like that, right?
Yeah, but
The real question is, without infinite storage, do you think we'd see more alt gameplay? Do you feel like we'd see people have unironic storage alts?
yeah, they would. They would
I
be
mean, like-
needed. They would simply be needed.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that I had a problem with it and still do. In any other game, right, the way that they put this strain on something as simple as storage of things that you might want to save. I'm not talking about limitations in space, because Eve's got that in droves, right? It was one of my first things to argue on the Proto CSM, that there was no such thing as a proper shipping option, because all the freighters didn't exist, and the industrial ships were way too small to haul the ore around that was needed, right? So in space there's still the limitation, but the limitation is a lot more natural, and you can go to a station, to your home, and store as much as you like, and that is such a unique thing, and it's not seen anywhere else.
It's something I haven't thought about because I don't play other games particularly.
Yeah, it's actually it's very telling. Like right now, I mean, I can tell you right now, I play Arcade as well, and I found in the beginning, I literally have farmed for hours just to earn enough gold to expand my fucking my bag. You know what I mean?
And then it's an endless struggle, right? About balancing your storage space and buying new storage space, and it scales pretty much exponentially, and a lot of it kind of tries to motivate and drive you into actually using real money to get that storage space. And even then there's an actual maximum limit, which just means that then you have to force yourself to go in and sort your assets in a way that just feels so tedious. And this is totally gone in Eve. How much junk you have lying around, there's really room to be a hoarder, and that's speaking as one of the big hoarders in this game, because I have shit that I don't even know.
I very much enjoy it as well, like as someone who's done alliance level logistics before. Thank fucking god for that. Like it would be so hard to do what I've done in the game, which is something that would be, well, I suppose the kind of things I do just don't make sense in other games anyway, you know. There's not any game where you have the equivalent of just like financing 100 battleships and putting them all on a station for someone, and just giving them out for free so that people can go and have a fight. There's no analog for that in other games, I don't think.
I do think that, to add to that whole topic, because I am a huge fan of the infinite storage space, and I think it's one of the best things about Eve, but there is one thing that I would actually like to add. I would not mind that it had a cost, that there was an overhead cost on the used storage space. It would,
Depends.
That's gonna add a lot of asset velocity immediately to the game.
because that would force people to
Sell off their stockpiles.
the shit that they don't want. It would mean that things that are especially things that are low ISK per cube valued would get out onto the market, would be traded.
Like minerals.
Things like minerals, especially things like minerals. And it ties into the fact that because of those low ISK per cube values, I do also think that CCP should take a new look and seriously consider something like an interbus-like system, because they don't want to give us the safety of automated travel, which I can kind of understand and I kind of agree with, but moving things like titanium or pyrite or anything in the realm of extremely bulky stuff is then not done. So it just ends up stuck in hangars, and sometimes people just leave it and it never hits market. That means that you have activity that you or wealth in storage that you don't know when it's going to be realized, when it's going to hit market and hit the economy. So what I would suggest is to give players this alternative to move in a very slow but extremely safe way assets that are in the very low ISK per cube. So I would say something like an asset safety based system, where you basically send it to your station of choice, and then the cost is based on the sub-holder tax.
In a market sense, what does it even mean to have things hoarded? I mean, for the most part, they're dead assets until you.
It's passives, right? It's passives, and what happens is that once the passive is old enough, well, this is basically Marsh's topic, but then you can basically say, well, I don't know about it anymore, I just write it off. That means that now it's potentially assets with 100% profit. You've written it off, and now it's potentially free discovered money when you find it again.
Which is why
like 6 months later.
Which is why I bought into your company.
There you go.
But again, that was of course one of the things that I was talking about way back, and I can understand why Eve was not mature back then. But now that we have 15 years behind us, I do believe that some of the things that were discussed very early on in Eve history, and especially when it comes to market related things, should be taken up and looked at again, because this is a more mature, more modern game. A lot of the things that were not possible in the past is now, I would say, easily technically possible. I don't know if you guys know, but one of the biggest problems with servers in the very early days of Eve was because one of the things that strains servers a lot is when they need to actually sync with the client, right? So when it needs to ask a question and get a reply, ask a question and get a reply. So every time you click refresh or needs tick refreshes, that strains the servers, right? One of the things that was extremely active back then compared to the hardware was the market, right? It was not just breaking the Eve servers, it was also load stressing your local client, because there was design flaws, like the fact that it automatically kept syncing with the server. You couldn't pause it, right? So your wallet kept refreshing live all the time. So if you had a lot of orders, and personally I had 3,500 orders active on one account, it basically had 5 to 10 finalized orders per minute. And when more players have these things, you just get this endless, basically a light DDoS attack on the servers from something like markets. The other one was when the server had to sync its own activities with the client in the form of things like drones, right? Because drones are automated, so it kind of needs to tell your client what it's doing with your drones. So when you launched more than 10 drones, the node just went dead, right? So you could drone kill someone by just launching them.
Oh, old drones, just mad, dude.
Yeah, but all these things are now technically not an issue. To DDoS a modern server.
Drones are still fucking. They still cause ridiculous amounts of tie-dye and lag. Like, drones are still fucking cancer at large scale. Like, unironically, if you're ever bashing a Keepstar, you tell your fleet to keep fucking drones in, because otherwise your drones will cause so much tie-dye that you will be there for a fucking hour longer because you had drones out. And it's fucking awful.
So you're saying that the defense, the defense should be to always use things like dummies and just launch as many drones, light drones, as you can.
That used to be like, that's a strategy that was employed by like Test and the low-sec entities, with one of the first like non-major entity Keepstars that was attempted to be anchored, where they had people like launching drones and smart bombing and just undocking and putting out tons of noob ships, just trying to lag up the server as much as possible, so that it would get to the point where like the tie-dye would get so huge that no one would want to bash it, because it would take 8+ hours.
And it was also a strategy to do the whole thing, because we didn't have the whole warp away with log off. And you logged off, you actually hung in space in the past for a few minutes, and
the best part of that was with downtime, because downtime used to not stop what your ships were doing for a while. So, for example, if you ever wanted to siege a tower, but you kind of wanted to do it in a perfectly safe way, what you'd do is you'd wait until like 30 to 40 seconds before downtime, you'd jump your dreads in, you'd siege your dreads, you'd put your guns on the tower, and then downtime would hit, and then your guns would keep firing during downtime because the siege timer means that you can't warp your ship off, so your ship just stays there shooting a tower for 5 minutes until they turn the fucking game off.
So that means that when downtime was over, you just won.
Yeah, well, when you came back to the game, like the tower would be reinforced and you could just leave. You just jump out because obviously there's no jump fatigue or anything.
Nice.
So like you just log on, jump out, done, out, I'm out, bitches. See ya. Although that was a fun exploit back in the day.
Yeah, those exploits, man.
As far as exploits are great.
Yeah, they were. As far as these, we were talking about depletion this episode and stuff like that. The assets I'm not sure if depletion is a correct term to manage assets. If CCP ever felt compelled to actually begin to manage players' personal assets, how do you think that will actually affect the market as far as maybe forcing players to make better decisions as far as what they hold on to, what they create with, what they sell?
I think you need to roll back a little bit, because you need to point to get to the point historically. Again, I know that Jintan gets the legacy code argument a lot. I'm pretty sure he's heard that so many times in his CSM meetings. But one of the things that's also very, very relevant to talk about here is that EVE is so old, and it's based fundamentally on old school game building, and that is when it comes to things like the finite state machine programming, and especially when it comes to things like how resources are managed, right? So it's very primitive loot tables, and these are static and they have not changed. They are exactly equivalent to what you find in any monster's manual when you look up treasure types. And if you can do that, you can basically game everything. You can sit there and you can calculate pretty much exactly what's going to come out, how much you need to bash on a specific type of rat until you get X amount of loot. And this has caused all the problems in the past, and it's still an issue today, because we still work with these, at least to my knowledge, very static loot tables, right? So when in the past you had the problem with gun mining, where you basically could just sit there and just shoot rats, and it was a lot better in mineral creation than mining. And then the solution to that, instead of fixing the loot table, was to remove the minerals from the loot, which means that now the whole value differentiation of the different meta levels disappeared, because you didn't have that ability to choose whether you wanted to ship them or use them for mining. And then of course, because it was so prevalent and you had these huge faucets of these loot drops, everything...
You also had the drone alloys were another one.
Exactly. Alloys was the same problem, again, because it's infinitely scalable, right? It doesn't diminish at any point. So you can just keep throwing man hours at it forever, and it's just going to yield the same and the same. And you can scale parallel also forever. It's too easy. It was even worse in the past, when you could do these things where you chained the rats, where you the whole thing would not die if you saved one rat. So you had...
Oh, you're talking about boat chaining. Yeah.
And it was magnificent, because you could just hold on to that one little rat, and then the rest would just keep coming and keep coming. And if you had done your calculations right, you would just sit there AFK killing forever. This is why pretty much everyone from that age has maximum Concord security standings, because it just trickled in automatically.
So one thing that we don't see too much in EVE, I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but would a system like a bind on pickup ever work for our economy?
No. Not in my opinion.
We do have bind on pickups already.
No.
The boosters, there used to be the boosters from the events. Those were bind on pickups. You could use.
Yeah, because they were a limited time, right?
Oh yeah, that's the same as it. They also have perishable effects on it, right? It works for a certain period and then they delete all of them. That's pre-announced.
There was also some things that weren't. I'm pretty sure they've released stuff that wasn't tradable before, and there was a lot. I remember there being annoyance about it, but maybe I'm remembering wrong.
Well, I don't think the Eve again the Eve USP likes anything that's related to these fake scarcity things, and this is again back to the whole topic of tonight's show, which is depletion and scarcity, right? There is nothing inherently wrong with scarcity. It's just when you put it in this clunky artificial way, whether you're doing scarcity in bag slots or bank slots or in bind on pickup, these are all artificial scarcities that are very much not received well. But CCP never got into then figuring out where can we put scarcity where it's acceptable.
I think one of the points where you can experience scarcity, like personally, I didn't really experience this, or I didn't realize that I was experiencing it until recently. I started messing around with contracts from nullsec a lot more, right? So I just didn't. There's like a scarcity of manpower that I didn't realize that I was experiencing. You know, not being able to use my social circles to, you know, get these contracts and things like that. Like I didn't realize how much I was missing. You know what I mean? So I don't know if we can use like social parts of the game to offer that avenue of scarcity, and hopefully maybe even combat kind of like the, you know, our alcoholic nature.
Well, I think well, again, my philosophy is pretty well known, but it ties back to the whole thing about assailable wealth. Right? If we don't motivate players to risk their assets, we're just going to end up with a new overlord, right? What we saw in the casino wars was basically how ISK is unassailable, but it's exactly the same with assets.
I mean, like real talk, the whole casino thing was nothing to do with unassailable wealth. I find it highly amusing when people are like, oh yeah, that was totally just done because casinos were ruining the game. No, it was not because casinos were fucking just like about to get CCP litigated out of existence. Like, let's be real here. If Valve gets its ass fucking handed to them in Washington, Britain is like bringing in new legalized gambling legislation over something very, very similar, which happened in FIFA. There's nothing to do with fucking goons getting rolled there.
No. I'm not saying that it's got anything to do with that. I'm just saying that the point was that that type of wealth accrued in the game was unassailable. That was why it was causing problems in the game. I'm perfectly aware that the only thing that actually strong-armed CCP to finally make a move on it was the legal issues. Otherwise we would have had this cancer still. And then of course I'm going to contradict myself, because I think we actually need gambling back in EVE. We just need it back in a way that makes sense in the game. The fact that we are now having an AT without gambling opportunities is really bad. I don't think that's benefiting anyone. I do not think it belongs outside of the game. I don't think it belongs in third-party tools of any kind. I think it needs to be inside the game, and it needs to be a design that is serviced by CCP, so players can utilize it and it still stays in the game. And then of course all the naysayers are going to say, oh well, it brings on the same thing and it's legally the same. No, it's not, because pretty much every game out there has in-game some sort of randomness, because then you would have to start attacking all random play or all gambling like behavior, and then me as a speculator is pretty much just as gambling related as betting on a football team, right?
You say that, but there's a very specific legal definition of gambling, and like the AT would fall under basically sports gambling or fixed odds betting terminals. It'd be something very similar to that.
Yeah, but it would be exempt in the same way that fantasy football and stuff like that is, because legally there is no value to assets in EVE.
There's value to clicks, though.
No, not when they're in the game. It's got no intrinsic value outside of the game anymore.
Okay, well, we can probably have this conversation for a while. I would love to see I would love to see gambling in the AT though. Like, I'm not arguing against your point. I am simply saying I don't think it's
Legally,
not even I don't think it's going to happen. I just don't think it will happen in the form that you want it to happen, where it provides basically an ISK sync for the game, or at least a way for people to just frivolously waste their wealth because they feel that that's a.
It's more that it's added content, right? It's not so much it's not even the ISK sync. It's more that when you don't really have a specific daily goal left, or you have some spare time, being able to sit down and play some EOH poker or something similar, casual gambling, is actually extremely entertaining. And if it's inside the client, it is really CCP's content and not something that's got value outside of the client.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would go for something more similar to a pick'em system, like, you know, maybe giving skins out to people who guess matches correctly or something like that. Or, I think that would be a much more, like, legally safe way to run the AT, if we wanted to gamble the AT. But this is something I've talked extensively with Logibro about, because it's something that I want to be able to be smug as fuck and be like, ha, I know these teams better than you do, and I can prove it because I have way better score on evepickums.com, whatever fucking bullshit name we give it.
Okay, let's see if we can hurry on to the next topic that we kind of touched upon a little bit, which is farming and resource gathering. Because again, now Jintan is of course a little bit handicapped because apparently he's not played any other games than Eve, so he's a true monogamous Eve player. But the rest of us occasionally stray and cheat on this old lady, and in pretty much every other game I've ever played, there's an endless debate of the problems with gathering and nodes and fundamental resources, right? Especially because it's always about, should we make all these nodes private, or so you can't node steal from each other, or what is the respawn rate? Is it too high? Is it too low? Which things become scarce? And eventually it seems as if they put them in a place where they are just abundant enough to never cause any real strain on the players. And I think if I compare back to even the early days, there was always a strain on resource gathering, even if it felt as if it was abundant and you could just find a new place. But because of all the mechanics in between, the hauling, the risk of having assets in space and all these things, it was always a struggle. It was never easy mode to gather resources in Eve. What are your thoughts on that, Roden? Because
it's still the case. It's absolutely still the case. Now, I would say that it has gotten easier and more exploitable for the raw harvesting aspect, right? The anomaly farming, the ore mining, the wormhole diving, all that stuff, right?
Yeah, I think anomalies was where this changed, right?
Yeah. So they changed kind of like how often they would show up, right?
In the past, when you only look at static belts, right? Static belts were actually depletable. Of course, they came back every day, but scale-wise, they were depletable.
They didn't came back as the same way. Like, if you mined out a belt, it would be worse the next day.
Yeah. So they had actually put in some sort of diminishing returns. It's just, again, the intention from CCP's side, I acknowledge, but they never did it in a way that was impacting enough. It's a little bit like how they had designed the old algorithm for handling things like renting office slots, which meant that you could never get an office in Jeddah, and it was always plugged, and it rose in such a slow way that there was never any incentive to stop renting it. So people basically had plugged JITA offices, just like in the old days they used to plug research slots and industry slots, just to keep them for themselves if they needed them. So you had a lot of slots.
Oh, I remember salting the earth with shuttle build orders.
Yeah, that's what you did. You put shuttles in while you were waiting, because then you knew that
No. When like someone was going to take your station, because obviously station build queues were like actually pretty valuable. You would just throw in like thousands of shuttles to build, because like it took no minerals to do, but it took a significant amount of time, so you could just stop them building there for like 2 months.
Yeah, it was worse in the past with NPC research, because it was such a scarce resource, and there was no real alternative except then eventually building pauses and doing it yourself. But you could not outsource that. You couldn't give access to anyone else, even though everyone was asking for that, right? Everyone wanted to be able to rent out their slots, so you could build a pause, rent out the slots, and then you could compete with the lack of available slots. But there was no incentive to cancel the NPC slots because they were so cheap. And this brings me back to the fact that when they changed the algorithm that handled the offices in JITA to something that was aggressive, it took about 4 months, and then the cost was so high that people canceled. And there's always 1 or 2 offices available in JITA now at all times because it's so aggressive. And I believe that it's the same that they should have done with things like static belts and with anomalies. Make it aggressive enough so at some point, if you keep hitting that thing, there is nothing left. And then you have to wait for it to, well, again, salting the earth. This is like over farming. If you over farm a field, you have to put your legumes out. You have to let it fucking replenish.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult problem to tackle, you know, because you want things to be available for players to interact with. But at the same time, I think CCP could make the act of moving goods and people.
But Rodin, there is not enough.
The actual barrier.
But Rodin, there's not enough players in EVE to do this with all of EVE. So what you're saying is that it's okay to have an infinite resource from anomalies or belts in one system because what? That creates gameplay? Well, if you had them,
if there's nothing for players to do, they're not going to play.
But the point is that that would be equivalent to, in any other MMO, to put the respawn rate of a node so low that it's worth staying at one node and just farming that instead of moving to the next one.
Well, we've kind of developed our culture to go, because we don't like, if it was back in a few years ago, we just don't see, like, a lot of people, new players just go straight to the end game stuff, you know what I mean? And it's super saturated in certain areas.
But how would it change by forcing you to move next door and then next door and then next door? If you have a flight of locust-sized harvesting group, right? Then you have to move it. This would also create content in the fact that they can't just sit in one location being defended very easily by a fleet, right? I keep joking with the fact that Null is the safest place in EVE.
It's a tough balancing act, but ultimately, if like the common player doesn't care about this level of economics.
Yeah, but this is not even just economics. It's about the fact that how can you, in any way, assail the productivity of goons if they can sit in 3 systems with their entire mining fleet and get capacity all the time. You can't attack them. You can't do anything to them. That means that mining is now an unassailable asset, right? It is impossible to stop it.
Correct. It is absolutely unassailable. That is a fact.
And this is what people do not understand, that in order for this to go away, you need to have depletion, so you force all the bees to actually find new flowers. There's not just an infinite amount in the flower bed outside the house. That's not enough for, I don't know, 5 million bees. It might be able to support 20,000 bees or 100,000 bees, but not 5 million. That's not enough with your little flower pot.
Sure, but I imagine that if even we were to find ourselves in a place where that level of scarcity is actually employed, I believe that whoever, the players that are going to be, involved are basically going to diplomacy their way to getting back into their old state.
Yeah, but the point I'm trying to make with discussing this whole topic of scarcity is that there will, and I think I was talking to this with talking to Apple Pear about this, that you will never only have one type of player then in a system because you want it balanced, right? You want a local balanced ecosystem. So you figure out what is the composition that this can carry. Or if you go over carrying capacity in mining or in ratting, then it depletes and you have to move, and then it's going to be something for the other group, right? You won't have you can't have over ratting and over mining in the same system.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it's just, there is no...
And this also ties into the new AI, which is what gives CCP the major opportunity to start looking at this and making that the whole emerging content, because you have now rats that can actually mine. That means that you want to clear the field of rats before you start mining, right? And then you create this industrialist risk in space that can then be attacked by other players or by new incoming and escalating rats, right? So you create a whole new ecosystem, but we need to start looking at depletion first, so you get players to distribute in a way that's not this extremely centralized way of thinking where everything just takes place in one or two places in Eve.
I mean, I guess one of the solutions we could probably, or just kind of ways of thinking about it, is maybe ensuring that space is not homogeneous.
Yeah, that's the worst thing, that it's so equal. Because I would almost say that composition is more important than respawn rate, and it's also why I think solving it with respawn rate is a little bit clunky. I would have gone in the direction of the old belts, where it just comes back in a different composition or with less and less value in it.
Yeah,
and then it maybe shifts into less and less value per time, things like that. I think it's very unrefined to just change something like the timer, because again, that is just annoying. That is just an annoying waiting period.
Was Eve ever not this homogeneous?
In the past, you had more difference in distribution of raw materials in space, especially with things like minerals, where you would have one region that was very strained on things like Noxium, and then you would have another that was very strained on Mexilon. It's the mid-range that was distributed differently between the factions, and then in Null it was, I believe, even more chaotic and randomized.
Those are the days, right? But then the belt atoms kind of changed that game.
That was basically a new kind of tit that everyone could just suck on forever. And when they then got it boosted in, what was that, 11, 12? That they got it boosted, it just got even worse. And of course, back then it was not necessarily felt that much yet, and especially because there was not that much oversight on what was actually being stockpiled by groups like goons, so you didn't have that insight really. So we have not felt those effects until now. I think that's
even if CCP wanted to employ like these types of ideas, would it even be effective given that certain groups are as big as they are?
Yeah, it would be effective on a time scale, right? You would have to introduce some of these things in small increments, one step at a time, right? And maybe not turn it up to 10 initially. This is very much like what Jintan was talking about in the meta show, right? When you guys were touching upon the topic of Macarials.
Yeah, that was an interesting topic. I think we missed a lot of the nuance there, though, in terms of how running a logistics program sort of works in terms of changing the supply and things like that, because you have to remember that the economic machine of EVE Online involves a shitload more people than a single alliance there's logistics train.
Yeah, and I think when
is maybe like 10, 20 people.
But I think the important thing is that you say logistic train, because what you're saying is that this changes things or strains the system on an internal level, right?
Yeah.
Because this is about the fact that they source the blueprints themselves, they source all the materials themselves, they build all the stuff themselves. It's all about internalized and self-sufficient mechanics. This is what players have been asking for all the way back since the Summer of Rage.
The question is, how realistically would you make regions not self-sufficient?
Well, the point is I want to create an option that motivates people to trade.
So you do that. Well, how that works in real life is that you give people advantages. Is that not? That's correct, right?
Yeah, and
people have advantages in either labor cost or positioning or access to certain things, and even in that kind of thing, you have what we have now in terms of capitals. We have large conglomerated entities.
But this is also why I would like to see, since they have now basically nerfed the value of skills with skill point injection, right? Then I would like to see those advantages and specializations be put into space. So now you even more need that diversification of space, and you need the different bonus giving stations, structures, rigs. You need to add that complexity, because without that complexity, everything is just an exponential game that's equal, and there is no difference.
To like throw the theoretical out there, like you say, giving whoever holds Delve gets 10% more max lawn, or
yeah, but I'd more say things like
I can't figure out a way.
The space might be balanced or misbalanced to the thing that it actually needs. I'd say that since some location like Delve has Blood Raiders, if Blood Raider ships needs a specific type of ore, I'd say that is the type of ore that should be in low supply in that region. Right, so that is the thing that you then need to import.
Or maybe having I don't know, maybe having like meta components like we have with the faction capitals. Maybe having those be required for ships, and have those be built in the opposite region.
I want the incentive to either trade, invade, or raid.
Yeah.
You have to do one of these three things. Whether you go in there and hostile mine for your Noxium that you have nothing of or hardly any of in your local area, or whether you do it by trading and figuring out what do they need and how can I get the best deal, the whole apple and oranges. But if everyone has orange trees, apple trees, and can basically source everything themselves, there is no incentive to do any of those three things. And this is fundamentally what I'm trying to lobby for with these past few months. It's that a lot of people say that that destroys gameplay if you just put strain in everywhere, and but my argument is that if you look at any other MMO out there, the problems that they run into is exactly tied to the fact that there is no strain, which means that players become bored, they finish to the current end level, and they fuck off.
Well, that is, I think, one of the biggest barriers to creating that volatility and yet fun atmosphere is actually things like Jita, things like Amar. You know what I mean? These major hubs that collect way too much stuff.
Yeah, and then people say that these locations that collect way more stuff, and how can we deplete it, or how can we destroy it, or how can we move it out? Well, first of all, my argument is you can't move it out if you don't create an incentive to move it out, right? If it's too cheap to stay in and live in New York, if everyone gets their free condos and everyone's got an access pass to the brokerage on the stock exchange, and everyone can build their own Walmart, and you just stack them on top of each other, and there's an infinite amount of them. If there's no scarcity, no supply and demand mechanics, why would you move out?
That's a very interesting point. But the question is like, would that benefit the game?
Yes, because my argument is, and I was trying to make this to Aerith after the Talking Station show, but I think I failed a little bit. If you force out the small traders from Jita, right? What you would get is you would get orderly queued market orders. So they would be of a size that shows that this is for big players and not for one single guy waving one share on the New York Stock Exchange floor and trying to outbid the other guy with 1 cent at a time, which is ridiculous. No one would pay attention to this guy in real life, right? But the point is that if you get these big boys focusing in Jita, that's only going to be bulk trading. Then everything else would become off-hop bulk trading, or it would become retailing. But again, because the price doesn't motivate us, and because the strain is put on the character sheets in the form of limited orders and limited contracts, it's basically incentivizing us to not move away, to only stay in one location.
Yeah.
Though that and jump faders sucks to say, but it should be a hell of a lot harder to move like large amount of goods around.
Well,
I think jump faders are way too far.
Yeah, the question is like, if you want to nerf logistics though, how do you do that without disincentivizing trading?
Well, you wouldn't nerf logistics,
those
you would
two are
boost
so
it.
interlinked.
If you created the incentive to move things out of the hubs, because the margins would become better.
Oh yeah, and fuck offshoring, by the way, that needs to die.
Yeah, but the point is that offshoring is a problem because CCP has put an infinite competitiveness in the structures. There's no scaling, there's no limit, there's no motivation to compete on price. They are all just go to zero.
Why do you think they set it up like that, to be honest? I actually don't know what the motivation would have been, because it seems counterintuitive to...
No, originally it was not intended to design.
Oh, okay.
And the point is that the incentive to compete needs to be to first compete with NPCs and then compete with each other.
Yeah.
Right.
And they basically saw the whole perimeter thing, and then they were like, "Oh, this is actually pretty interesting. This is an interesting facet of this bug. We're not going to change it until we see it causing a large scale problem."
You could take something as simple as a market rig demanded fuel based on activity. That's one of the simple things that I would suggest. The other one would be to make sure that all of these payment schemes were always separated into a base cost and a percentage from NPCs, right? And that need to be exactly as aggressive in its increase and decrease supply and demand based as the office slots in Jita. So basically you would end up having the base fee goes up with activity and the percentage goes down, which motivates bigger and bigger entities that basically forces out the lower boys to then move next door and then spread out the market. The point is we have a centralized market and there's no incentive to service anything because everyone just goes to Jita.
Yeah, that, and you have things like hauling services that make it a hell of a lot easier.
And because I have to put opportunity cost, right? Sorry?
Shout out to Push X.
Yeah, they're fucking amazing. Push and Red Frog.
Saves me a lot of time.
The point I'm trying
I'll take my sponsorship now.
If you put a limitation on something like market orders, right? That means that I can hardly seed on the public market 3 different ships, doctrine-wise. I can only do that 1 or 2 locations. That means that you can't even specialize. It's like having being offered to do a retail thing, a Walmart, but each character can only have this much shelf space. And it's not scalable.
There's technically already a limit per character on market orders.
Yeah, that's the point. But it should not be on the character. It should be in space. It should be on the station.
Structure.
Yeah.
Structure.
I should be able to do 305 per structure I want to work in. And that's my argument.
Actually, How would that actually work in actual practice?
It would work in the way that
the environment right now.
All the bulk sizes in Jita would be split up and spread out. There would be a higher margin for the convenience service, but because it would cost nothing in opportunity cost, because you could just take the next location, the next location, the next location. That means that each character is no longer limited by this artificial stopgap. It's the same as in other games that always do these, you can only do 10 orders or 20 orders on the auction house. It's exactly the same type of artificial limitation. Instead of making the limitation the cost and then promote emergent and spread out gameplay.
As long as there's a way to outcompete your peers,
you do that on price.
Orders.
You do that on price, and the benefit from an ISK sync point of view is that CCP would then be able to sync out ISK on sales tax, which I still think should be a soft tax. So the bigger price still has those taxes, and it just spreads
Caleb,
out.
Classic 1%er asking for tax cuts for the rich.
No, I'm not asking for tax cut. I'm asking for tax increases.
Come on, man! You can't give me the meme, please. Memes are all I have in this conversation because I have no fucking clue what you're talking about.
No,
give me the memes.
It's the point that the big traders in real life, when you talk about things like stocks and commodities, right? The big traders handle very big orders at a time. That means that they have a base fee that might be high, but the percentage to take is extremely low. That means that the little guy is not going to be trading in these massive chunks at a time. They're going to trade with their local bank, and then they get a stake in the thing that's bought by the broker. This is basically putting in all the layers of modern markets, so you motivate people to go out and think in terms of service. And then I know that all the null entities are going to say, oh, we don't need that. No, because you guys basically run internal markets. You're not interested in public markets. You're not interested in competition. So I fundamentally understand that.
In chat, because it's something I know, and Marsha says that in null options are seeded by contract, not on market. No, they are not. They are seeded on contract because that allows you to seed them on alliance contracts, which means that people who aren't in your alliance can't buy them. Which means that people can't, you know, for example, if you have a Nyx tackled, they can't just buy up every interdictor on your market, as PL has done to us a couple of times.
And then and when you say bought up everything, right, this brings on one of the strategies that I used to use back in the day when there was no limitation on orders, is that you always have more than one price up, right? So you basically split your stacks based on how much do you want to sell today, how much do you want to sell on tomorrow's price or next week's price, and what's going to be in your back order that's going to be something for the guy that wants to pay crazy amounts to try and bleed the market dry. If my backstop is 200% above the market price, if you even try to buy that, I know that you're intentionally trying to manipulate the market. Then hopefully I've been smart enough to also have a little bit of stock in my passive assets on the floor. So next time I'm going to put that up, and then you're just going to have no chance of doing this hole punching and market cornering. Right now what we have is micro bidding, high frequency trading, and hole punching market manipulation all over the place, because there is no way to counter it. And the way to counter it is to have enough orders available and enough seeds in the local area.
I just want to point out Okulo in chat. We should also charge people, Akul says, we should also charge people for changing orders. Death to 0.01 Iskers. Long live strategic pricing. What do you think about that, Caleb?
Well, it's kind of implied in what I'm arguing, right? If you created a broker fee where the base broker fee goes up dynamically with financial activity and the percentage goes down, that's to put up the order. But then the manipulation or the modification would also be based on the base cost. So it would be too expensive to do if you're doing it with two small orders. If your order is 1/100th of the size of the big boy, when you modify, it also costs you percentage-wise 100 times more.
Well, that's hefty. I mean, I can see why that would be a limiting factor, but holy shit. That's crazy. I mean, so we've been talking a lot about the depletion piece, but I think what should probably go hand in hand with depletion would be genuine drivers of conflict, right? I think it would be pretty imbalanced to just think up ways to deplete the market, but then at the same time, that in and of itself is a conflict for a driver, right?
But you've already seen that the argument that I'm trying to make is a huge conflict driver, because you've seen some of this in how the high-sec wars on structures played out, right? The fact that you got all these shady dealings, you got the NETC, you got the Mogul, you got PL, and then they collude to basically kill off any smaller entities, and then they divide up the market. So you've already seen that this is exactly how it works. This is what creates conflict. The opportunity to have conflict creates the conflict when the threshold is reached, when it's worth it. I know that the numbers that Goblins were granted from, I don't know what financial advisor, that said something like 300 billion per month or something for the Plex market alone. All of that's just people doing bad math, but it is a fact that there is an opportunity to create conflict, even in high sec where conflict is so horrible, right?
Is that the type of conflict driver that speaks to most people, though, and that will continue to keep them attacking their neighbors?
Okay.
I
think my argument is that I don't think MC or other mercenaries should care directly about these changes that I'm suggesting. I'm just saying that they will get more game by supporting them. Because then people that own structures and want their neighbor killed will hire mercenaries. If everyone is just agreeing on having the 0% offshoring, then everyone is equal and no one is really making money, and it's really going to be about who's got the biggest wallet, and then they can just push out everyone else. It's not going to be balanced competition or balanced warfare, if such a thing exists. But you would get a lot more competition, a lot of more contracts being handed out to people that destroy assets, and even passive inactive structures would most likely be on contract for people like yourself, Robin.
Yeah, I mean, it would actually only be more helpful if attacking or even defending citadels would actually be engaging gameplay. It's currently not. I'll tell you that right now.
That's why I keep talking about things like when we reach a saturation where real estate is an actual thing in space, right? And there's enough smaller entities, weak entities, or people that actually just left their structures in space. Why would I want to sit there and do the wrist-cutting PI when I can just get someone to get stuff from that, right?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, one of the ways to kind of circumvent having to deal with scarcity is having friends that can help you out, right? I mean,
and it's about what has price and what is the value, right? You know what the salvage value is of destroying a structure. If that became a thing that would make it worth actually going out and doing that instead of trying to get salvage from elsewhere, it would become a farmable object. I don't know how much you guys have looked at the calculations for that, but I'm sure that eventually we're going to reach a saturation spot where there's enough structures out there so it can feed a lot of new creation of structures, all the small stuff that's been built.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things too is like there needs to be upkeep in these damn things. There isn't. You can literally just have them up.
Yeah, everyone is
leave them alone.
Yeah, everyone is kind of agreeing on some of the things that I think most people want to see is some sort of better balanced upkeep thing, rebalancing on the invulnerability timers and things like that. I don't know how far do you think we are from getting any kind of response from the CSM and from CCP? Because I know that discussion is still going on, right, Jim?
There's a lot of discussions going on. I'm literally in the discussion right now, which is why I went quiet. Sorry.
But the discussion on timers is still going on, right?
Yeah, it's still being talked about.
Is there any is there any hope? Are we going to see an actual answer soon?
NDA.
Of course, NDA.
That is NDA.
Yeah, I'm just glad that there's discussion.
My hope levels at NDA.
Yeah, at least we've got confirmation that it's being discussed. Most likely heavily discussed. Because I think, and the funny thing is that in this case, it sounds to me as if, I don't know if you get this feeling, Jintan, that pretty much everyone agrees that they could do the things with asset safety a little bit different, a little bit better. They could do the invulnerabilities a little bit better. I know that of course there's people like Roden that would love it if there was no invulnerabilities at all. Then you could just go and shoot everything, right?
Yeah, murder.
Murder, death, kill. But everyone agrees that we want something a little bit better, right? Even the risk averse.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's just too too slanted towards the defender. Like too much, honestly.
Have we seen any keep star fights at all since the two first ones?
We've seen fights over anchoring.
Anchoring
keep
stars.
Auto keep star.
Better get this shit before it gets born.
Yeah, because like once a keep star's alive, you're like, well, I guess I've got to kill this entire alliance because it's easy to fucking kill than the keep star.
Yeah.
It's unironically easier to just kill an alliance than it is to like grind down a keep star that's actively defended.
It's terrible.
We'll
see, man. I mean, it's such a crazy time to be, you know, especially when we kind of have all these concerns about citadels and their cousins, right? And we got refineries coming up. I really wish some of these things would be ironed out before refineries come out. I'm imagining it's going to be a bit of a shit show if they come out and it's in the citadel system that we currently have.
I think my take on all this is that I'm seeing CCP and even the CSM starting to think a little bit more on balance and not even in the traditional selfish interest way. I don't get the feeling that the current CSM and the one before, and actually the one before that, have been egocentric in the way that
you're saying the CSM 10 wasn't egocentric.
I'm saying that
actually make that quote. Is that gonna be a quote that I can assign to you?
I don't think it was.
CSM 10 was not egocentric.
I'm gonna say that they were not as bad as I have seen them in the past. I do admit that it's this one and the one just before that's been maybe the best ones I've ever seen. And I'm very impressed at some of the things that they've managed to push through. But I think we've had a lot of drama to reach that point. But now, because we are there, what I'm seeing is that the CSM is getting a lot better work done. They are communicating with CCP and with the players a lot better than at any time before this. And CCP are bringing back something that resembles their balls. I'm not entirely sure. Have they got them? Have anyone felt them up? Have you been feeling them up yet?
I haven't felt up Seagull's balls, no. Haven't like reached down there to see.
Because I am definitely seeing a change in pace and in direction from the slump that we've been in. And this whole hold my beer nerf bat period was just hilarious. I hope it's not too damaging, because it was very entertaining, even though I don't agree with most of the things they did, or at least not exactly how they did it, but I definitely saw big balls again.
Yeah, hopefully it makes more sense as far as why they did that when we see refineries come online.
That's
and you know.
That's the one I'm looking forward to. I'd like to say that we should kind of end the normal show here and then open the mic, because I would really like to get Marsha and anyone else that's interested to come on and rant a little bit about whether we've been idiots or saying things that actually make sense.
All right, yeah. Hopefully folks can come on. That'd be great. Like Hulo as per usual, like doing some good work in chat, not on comms.
Always.
So we'll see. I mean, there's the idea of depletion is good, but you really need to approach it kind of like in a multi-pronged way. You know, it's not just a one and done deal. It's a lot of pieces working simultaneously, and sometimes they're working against each other.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I took away from I know that Aerith has been repeating this many times, and I get the feeling that he's right, but not entirely. I think he's talking about things that sometimes feels a little bit like half chest beating and half fact, right? When he's saying that CCP only thinks about 1 or 2 levels. I think what they don't do is that they don't consult with the people that necessarily see beyond those 2 levels. That's the feeling I get, right? Today we were making fun of this fact when we were having dinner, that you have Ghost and Neural and Quant, and they are all very much related to economy and finances, but from very different angles, right? So someone like Quant that's extremely knowledgeable about the actual financial instruments and number crunching and the whole quant based side of finance, but maybe not so much on all the other things like the underlying scarcities and utilities and things like the bookkeeping and that side of finance. And the same with someone like Ghost that might know a lot about the bookkeeping and the finance, that doesn't understand much about the actual numbers that Quant does, and then he doesn't care much about the fundamentally underlying ecology. They remind me a lot of the grades of interest, where you have a TA guy like VV in the past and now Lockfox. They don't really care much about where things are coming from or whether they are named one thing or another. They just care about what's the candlestick doing, what's the heat map saying, and where is this thing gonna move tomorrow, right? That's their interest, and they don't need more information. Whereas the longer term investors, the hedge fund managers and things like that, need to know, what is this, how is it going to be affected by tomorrow's disruptive technologies and so on and so forth. So I'm saying that they do have these people in CCP, it's just that I'm not yet seeing that they are responsible for oversight.
No, I mean, I don't think anyone wants to claim it. I don't think anyone wants to claim the responsibility of, I'm gonna, you know, start leading Eve's economy in a particular direction, you know, as a developer or part of the developer team to do that. I don't think anyone wants that responsibility. I don't think they know enough of it.
And welcome to Marsha.
Hello.
Marsha.
Can you
Hi,
hear me?
Marsha.
Yep.
Just that, I wanted to mention something that I've noticed, because it takes me ages to actually recognise something that I've noticed. But I've been looking at Reddit for the last few weeks, as you do. And I mean, I deleted my Reddit account last year because it was just ridiculous, even attempting to have a conversation on there. The stupid replies you get, the private messages are just like, who are these people? And I've been posting on Evo for the whole time that I've been playing. I'm 10 next year as well, by the way, Jin. But I was noticing, probably this week, that I was kind of looking at them and thinking, they're raging themselves out. They're starting to run out of steam. They're starting to like go sort of lying on their faces going, you know, like hyperventilating because they've screamed enough. And I noticed,
oblivion.
yeah, but I kind of looked around and I thought, you know, all the adults have disappeared from the room. Last year, and sort of at the point that CCP moved onto Reddit, and it was really Falcon and a couple of others that made a big point about posting stuff on there first, and they really offended a lot of people who did not want to be forced onto our Eve. At that point, you had people like Elise, Graph, various others who you would consider to be senior people in EVE were actually stepping in, calming down the storm.
That's because Kugu died. Like,
And-
every Kugu booster just like came over there, and then RE was just shit, so no one stayed.
And but that's the thing, is this feels concerted, that all of the people who could have stepped in the last 2 months when Reddit has been kicking off literally just went, no, fuck you, you can rage yourselves out, we're not even listening. And because I mean, obviously, like, as I say, I've been reading all these forums for so long, eventually you start to notice when people are stepping in and turning the tide of the conversation. In this case, they actually didn't, and they just let them rage, and they weren't letting them rage at CCP, they were just ignoring them. And I kind of think this summer of mild discontent, as Dirk's put it, it is an interesting thing, because at the end of the day, these people, a lot of them weren't around for Incarna, they weren't around for the riots, so they're kind of like trying to do the chest beating thing. Yeah, we can make CCP bend to our will. And actually, CCP have just completely ignored them. And yes, they have misstepped there with the communication, but the actual decisions they've made may not be incorrect. I agree with what Oko's saying. It's worrying that those senior people are perhaps also sort of disgruntled and they're just not saying anything. This is the bit that we need to clarify. How deep does the disgruntlement go? And is it shared by people across the board, or is it just the rages on Reddit?
I think the problem
as
with
I've quietly said before, the late spring of mild discontent was very politically convenient for certain people.
I think what I have an issue with the whole Reddit communication platform is that one is so horrible when it comes to discussing things that are not necessarily easy to grasp, or not necessarily just passion or opinion driven, but more fact driven. It's really difficult to make any dent in the rages and the up and down voted culture that's actually on Reddit, right? Discussing something like economy, markets, depletion, scarcity, economy, it's extremely tough.
Yeah, because you have to you have to be the grown-up that says we need it to be a certain way, even though it may not be fun in the interim.
Yeah, and then you always
for the help of the game.
You get these piling ons of people that say, yeah, but that's not going to be fun, and that's going to hurt my thing. Yeah, but the point is that it might not, right? It's only that you perceive it as such because you have not taken the time to sit down and think about it. Like when I suggested that one of the things that CCP really should do is remove the blue loot from wormholes, because that would make the stuff that comes from wormholes more valuable. And it's just a total mystery why that would be for people in wormholes. Like, yeah, okay, then I need to start you out with 101 book on economy and talk about bananas and apples, and why if you can make one and then you can trade it for X amount of bananas. Like, it's so difficult to explain these things if people are totally oblivious and don't actually think about it in their daily game play. And that's maybe the biggest problem, that because they don't care what the argument is, if CCP then only looks at the vocal majority, they're never going to get any of the ideas or the suggestions that might actually help them out with the problems they're having with the game.
Well, to go back to that idea of mature discussion, sorry Rodin, do you want to go? I just want to pick up on what Oko said here about this old age problem of private versus public good, because I was listening to TIS earlier, which I've not finished, but I noticed there was a very specific point where they were talking about Plex trading, and Arith said something that I completely agree with. Also, so did somebody's keying up. Typing.
You should listen to the latest CSM podcast.
Oh yeah, I need to go back and listen to that as well. But
it's very interesting.
It was good.
The bit that it came out with that intrigued me, and Probag backed it up as well, and said and Kenneth Feld did, that the big traders, or the ones that were on the podcast, do not engage in Plex trading because they see it as bad for the game. I've always said this, like, it's not a market that I really want to engage in, because there's a danger that you could inadvertently knock people out of the game.
And it's a double-edged sword, right? Because if they do, right, that would motivate CCP to do something more extreme to that market, and they can easily do that. That means that all these big money players that would say, well, we're doing it in respect for CCP, yeah, you also know that that's exactly the thing that CCP can turn at a whim, and then they basically kill 30% of your wealth instantly.
Did you notice though they made two very harsh suggestions that I think you would agree with? One was you must increase the industrial slot price, but the other was put a tax on the sale of Plex and make it big, you know, like 2%, maybe base, maybe 5%. And I kind of heard that and thought, wow, this was being discussed 3 years ago when Plex first started spiking, you know, as it was coming towards the 1 billion mark, and people were like, oh, that's it, I can't play anymore. And I remember arguing about this with,
but it's not necessary. If okay, with the things that I suggested, you don't need that, because if you got any financial activity brings up the price of trading in any location, you're going to get the same effect, because you cannot trade one Plex at a time. You can only trade very big chunks of Plex in one location, and that again supports the whole thing of getting up to having them facilitated in more locations than one, so you don't have to be dependent on things like jitter prices. But again, CCP has brought in a bad solution to a known problem. They brought in the Plex Vault, which basically makes this suggestion, which is based on supply and demand and market, impossible, right?
I'm not actually assessing the arguments that they proposed, because I'm not sure if I agree with them, but what I was conscious of when I was listening to it is these are high-level players that are making a suggestion on a podcast that's going to be listened to by about 800 people. If you look at the numbers that have been picking up on TIS the last few weeks, and these are quite radical. I mean, and they are hard nerfs that are being proposed by players, where in the past, when there's been efforts from the player base to say, look, Plex is going up too much, people are going to start cutting the game, the debates that I watched on Evo and on various forums, anybody that proposed something harsh like that as a realistic measure got shot down in flames. Now when you start seeing people who are on the CSM proposing it, that's a major shift. Attitudes have shifted, and what people are saying now is maybe hard changes need to be made because the economy is in free fall, and that falls in with what you've been saying, that big changes need to be made long term. So it feels like there's a different discussion going on now.
Yeah,
people are aware of the problem.
Yeah, the tone has changed. I just think that personally I would definitely not use something like a tax on Plex trade. I would say instead, why don't CCP just go all the way and say, we're just going to halve the cost to utility on game time?
Yeah, I mean, there's a range of solutions, but the point is, and I suspect this is because of Quant's MER and the activity in Delve, that these questions are coming up because the ISK delta is going up so much, Plex are going up at the same time, everybody is aware of it. So even the people who actually sub, who don't pay by Plex, are aware that there's a problem. That's new. It didn't used to be like that. People would be like, oh, well, why don't you just pay for the game? You know, we don't really care about people who Plex. Yeah. They're actually starting to become aware that this is a global problem.
And the point is that they're trying to hurt it on the storage value, right? If you try to hurt Plex on the storage value and on its general utility for other things, especially for the microtransaction based things, then you're basically cutting your own foot, right? But if you do it on something like game time, you're not cutting your own foot. You are incentivizing more players, even if it's alts. That's a different problem with the whole multi-boxing and infinite accounts. But you are making it easier for new players to actually stay in the game, right? If you just cut the cost in Plex, not the value of Plex, but the cost to get 30 days to 250 instead of, or I'd say 300. So it's an easy conversion in 10 per day. So if they did something like that, that would basically take off some of the heat, because the utility of game time is what the average player needs. They can figure out how to, I think that's actually a Jintan quote, the whole thing of balancing profit and expenses when it comes to how many skins they buy or how much ISK they get by selling Plex. But the Plex used...
Like, the question is, then do they change how much money it costs to buy a Plex, and you effectively devalue, you're effectively increasing the value of anyone who's bought Plex before that point to Plex.
Pretty much
That's
on.
really weird. Like that will fucking that's gonna
But-
have huge ramifications.
Yeah, but it's not
That's
going
not
to
an
change.
intervention.
But it's not going to change the
That's-
price, right? You're just saying
Yeah,
that
well-
utility, play-wise, right? You always get 2 months instead of 1.
That's decreasing the cost to play the game.
Yes, that's a good thing because that
to
makes it.
stabilize the in-game economy.
Yes, because then it reduces the value of speculation.
Okay.
Because you've just real life devalued all the Plex that's already in the game. But you have done that by increasing its game time utility to almost double.
That's a bold move, to say the least.
Because people struggle to get playtime. I'd go even further and say, just make it training time. Make everyone able to log in with and play with whatever skill level they have. And the only thing that you're actually paying for is increase of skill time. So if you are comfortable with your 100 million, you can log in, use your 100 million. You're not going to get more ever unless you Plex. That's my even more extreme solution, because that would remove all the speculation in Plex and all the Plex strain
And
on utility.
the vast majority of CCP's money.
No, why?
Yeah.
Why?
That means that
it's all going to the same people anyways. It's going to the ones that need skill points.
if I didn't have to pay my sub to do what I can do now, I would not pay my sub. I don't really have anything more to
well, to be honest,
I don't pay my sub. I just pay with other people's Plex.
there's a way of scaling it, and it would be through account consolidation, whereby everybody is allowed to consolidate all the characters into one account. You can actually play them at the same time, but you have a sliding scale for Plex. So for argument's sake, you've got a main that you want to sub, and you actually want them to earn SP, you pay for Plex. If you've got an alt that's got, as Caleb says, 100 million SP, and you don't want them to earn any more SP, but you want to be able to log them in, you pay for 250 Plex, not 500. So you scale it.
Yeah. You create granularity of use and utility of Plex. It's also why I talked about the things that you activate what skills from an alpha are now available when you're logging in as an alpha. So you basically balance it that way. That makes it less a speculative utility. It would remove the speculation a little bit from Plex, because right now it's just a storage of wealth. And then that brings me back to the whole topic of this, which is scarcity and depletion. If you do not have scarcity and depletion and an infinite stockpiling of assets, any other asset but Plex will always deplete in real value.
I don't think we're ready for that.
No, but that's what's happening. You might see a nominal value on, say, the mineral index. If you took the entire basket, right, the nominal value might have gone up over the last, let's say, 7 years, but not the real value. The real value is lower.
Yeah, you're right.
This is what people do not understand. That if you store in anything but Plex, you're losing money. You might win on utility because it is a more active utility when you're playing, so you can make more money on it on margins and things like that, and it's more volatile, so it's more fun to actually speculate in, and it's what you can speculate in on the long term, right? Because when CCP brings in changes like T3 and stuff like that, then there's a whole thing that changes. But the point is that then someone else is losing.
Can I just say, SP trading's been demonised over the last few weeks because of ghost training, and it strikes me as a little bit unfair because I only know 2 other sort of large-scale SP traders. We never expected it to be this profitable for this long, and as I've already said, I don't trade in Plex because I don't want to actually dent the market and cause people to unsub. If it gets to the point where Plex hits 2 billion, then that whole SP farm will get shut down because I've got residual SP behind it, that because they're not alpha alts with the base 5 million, they're actually trained alts that I was going to sell under the old system. I can just unsub them, train them as alphas, and pump out the residual 5 million that I've got, and there's 300 billion tied up in that. And I suspect the SP traders that work ghost training are similar. They've actually got ISK invested in their farms. It's people who got into the market later who got in and have been manipulating it and have been basically exploiting it that have caused the problem. So I wouldn't say be careful about this, because it's not that many people. They're not creating that much pressure on Plex, not by comparison with the manipulators. And you know, when you go buy a bulk Plexes, I mean, I have to buy about 180 a month, and it's always the same sellers. So I know damn well there's people that have got control over the Plex market, and if it's going up and down, it's them doing it.
And this is kind of what CCP is unaware of how to handle, or how to at least alleviate a little bit. It seems as if they keep turning the wrong knob and coming up with the wrong fix, right? I keep pointing at things like making an infinite number of industry slots as the key example of CCP totally doing the opposite of what you should do when you have a problem with slots. And it just goes back to everything they do. They put the limitation on market orders on the character sheet and not on the actual structure. Same with contracts, same with research slots, same with offices. It's like, why do you not understand that scarcity needs to be in space, so there's something to build for, something to strive for, something to fight for?
But just to go back to this thing about trading in Plex and trading in SP, both of them are basically using Plex, which is the gold standard of EVE. It has never really significantly gone down. It's always been on an upward trend. And so, as again was said in TIS today, if you went on to MD and posted a topic saying, I'm about to leave EVE for a year, what should I invest in? It will always be Plex. But if you were talking to somebody and it was a more involved debate a couple of years ago, they'd have said invest in characters, because there's a good chance they'll go up as well. Sub them and train them for however long with the infinite skill queue, come back and sell them. So character trading, even before SP trading, was linked to Plex, because you knew that the value would keep going up. As it is now, say for argument's sake one of these proposals about changing the way Plex is trading is implemented, it can't be done without touching SP, because they're so intrinsically linked. You also can't nerf SP trading without touching Plex. It's, you know, they are kind of the same thing.
Well, I mean, you can touch SP trading without touching Plex, but I know what you're getting at there, in terms of the supply and demand of Plex is intrinsically linked to the supply and demand of SP.
What's interesting as well is that they've been dumping Plex via these drops on whatever that new site thing is. Was it Rogue Drones?
Drone Swarm, and then next time it's going to be the agency that's also going to be making.
I would know that the guy in charge of that, who is CCP Dragon, has. Well, I actually can't. I don't know. If
this is also why I'm saying that you cannot count Plex as real money. In a legal case, you can never count that as real money, because then CCP is printing Plex illegally when they do that. When they drop them as loot, it can no longer be real money, no longer have any tie to real money, because then they are printing money themselves. That's illegal. So it's either or. You can't have both.
I don't know if I've actually clarified it to you, Caleb, but they have said that they do create Plex out of thin air now. Like that is
that means that it's no longer legally a value in real life.
Well, yeah.
They would never manipulate the market directly using fake Plex.
It's what no one's saying there. It was only 60k Plex, which if you work it out, it's a handful of subs. It's such a low amount that it can't be having any real impact. They're going to have to increase it by a hell of a lot, and at that point they'll be balancing it out against their own books. If they drop too much, people are not going to buy them. But you're also having an impact on the people that do buy them are being undercut by CCP themselves. It does create a bit of a conundrum. Anyways,
I think we should continue the chat behind the scene, but I think I should end the stream so we don't speak on the record. So I am going to have a bio break after this, and I'm going to say goodbye to everyone and thanks for coming.
All right.
And then I'm going to ask anyone watching to then come on the after hours where we are not recording and you're not going to be held accountable for what you say.
So I'm gonna go to fucking bed.
Yeah, okay, Jintan, night, and thanks for coming and doing this.
Thanks, guys.
07.